And it gives me real pleasure to talk about a subject which I'm really passionate about. And as I said, we're going to be looking at wonderful works of literature, whether that's a poem, a play, a novel, or even a novella, which has been used by a composer and transformed by a librettist into what we now know as being pretty standard repertoire in the opera world. I have based my talk into 4 sections, and I will just briefly tell you what those 4 sections are before I share my screen. The first, I'm going to be looking at love and romance. Well, we can't have a talk without that subject. It pretty much dominates a lot of the opera repertoire. And of course, those love stories are often not straightforward. There's some ambiguity or a problem that comes along the way. We'll be looking at those. My second heading is going to be under power and revenge. And again, that features heavily in a lot of, as you know, a lot of literature and a lot of opera. And it really does come with some tragic element as well. My third subject is going to be looking at identity and transformation. And this is where individual characters have had to undergo some real change, and they are transformed into a new trajectory in their life. So that is exciting. Although I've only got 2 examples in that, I hope it will be informative. And my final subject this afternoon is going to be looking at fairy tale, fantasy and magic. So I probably don't need to explain any more about that, but I hope it will all be very enjoyable. So I'm going to share my screen now, and we will begin the slideshow. Okay, so George Bernard Shaw, a man never short of a word or 2. He was a full-time opera critic before he became a writer. And he pretty much summed up what opera is all about. Well, it is when a tenor and a soprano want to make love and are prevented from doing so by a baritone. And that happens in a lot of opera. And he also reportedly said about opera in general that if anyone could make any sense of it, it would crumble into absurdity. Those were his very words. And his play Arms and the Man, I remember studying that for O-level English literature, has actually been made into an opera by somebody called Oscar Strauss, and that's Strauss with 1 S, and he wasn't related to the Johann Strauss family or to Richard Strauss. It's more like an operetta. And also his play Pygmalion has been made into a musical, My Fair Lady, which often comes onto our television screens every December. Very fine work that it is indeed. On to another writer now, who I hope you will recognise, W.H. Auden. He said, "No good opera plot can be sensible, as people do not sing when they feel sensible." Well, that may or may not be true, but he, again, very witty. He collaborated with Benjamin Britten, fabulous English composer, on his opera Paul Bunyan in the 1930s. And he also, Auden, wrote a fabulous set of songs for soprano, the cabaret songs, and the first one of which I have performed is called Tell Me the Truth About Love. And if you want to find the poem for that online, I can guarantee that you will be in fits of stitches by the end of it. It's fabulous. So that's the cabaret songs by Auden. We're going to be looking at the most popular operas, ones which are in the current repertory all around the world. And these are going to come onto the screen right now. Some of them you may recognize, you may have heard of, or some you may not know at all. But they all have very significant writers associated with them. And I shall be featuring some of these in my talk as we go through. And these vary from Italian opera to French, English opera as well, and we have a Russian opera here. So that Eugene Onegin, that is, and I will be talking about that in a little more depth. So let's plunge in the deep end, and just get my screen going onto the next slide. Here we go. This is a fabulous painting by Ford Madox Brown, and you may recognize the characters. We have got Romeo on Juliet's balcony. Yes, indeed. And I love the way his arm is outstretched, as if he's flying in and flying out. Romeo and Juliet, obviously, by William Shakespeare. Interestingly, the full title of this play is The Tragedy of Romeo and Juliet. The star-crossed lovers, yes. Juliet Capulet and Romeo Montague are, unfortunately, their families are at loggerheads with one another. But what a subject for a play, what a subject for an opera, and it has been set by several. And I will tell you the most popular is by Charles Gounod, and this was in the 1860s. It's very melodious, it's very tuneful, quite delightful, as a lot of French opera is. It has also been set by Bellini, but he called it I Capuletti e I Montecchi. And that's really quite a different style altogether. In a nutshell, what I would tell you about Bellini, he was one of the 3 bel canto composers. Bel canto meaning beautiful song. The other two composers are Donizetti and Rossini, and I will be discussing those also in more detail. However, Romeo and Juliet has also been set by Delius, English-German composer Delius, in a piece called A Village, Romeo and Juliet. It's not performed that often. In fact, Delius operas are hardly performed in England. I did premiere one of them actually at English National Opera, and that was called Fenimore and Gerda. It was quite a strange piece. Anyhow, so the other work which is really famous based on Romeo and Juliet, I'm sure you know, is Bernstein's West Side Story. It's not an opera, it is a musical, but a really, really fine one. So Donizetti was, as I mentioned just now, one of the 3 bel canto composers. And he wrote a lot of comic opera, and he wrote a lot of serious historical opera as well. And he used the works of Sir Walter Scott, who I have to say was very instrumental in forming this sort of Italian romantic opera in the 1840s. He was Scottish. Interesting that Donizetti should choose works which are based in Scotland or England. Elizabeth, Queen of England, Anne Boleyn, or also Lucia di Lammermoor as well, which is, we're going to hear a clip from that in a moment. It's just quite fascinating that he was intrigued by these stories. La Donna del Lago, the Lady of the Lake, is by Rossini, the third of the bel canto composers. But let's just look a little bit at Lucia di Lammermoor. Lucy is her name. She's actually in love with someone who she can't be with, and she ends up marrying someone else. And there's a rather unfortunate scene, which is on her wedding day. In her bridal chamber, she decides to murder her husband. And there is a very famous aria scene which follows, and we're going to have a listen to that scene. It's actually called the Lucia's Mad Scene. And what I would like you to look out for are the extraordinary, I mean, really, really, absolutely incredible vocal athleticism that Nathalie Desai gives in this performance, which is from 2009. There is some blood on the screen, so I hope that's okay with you, but you may care to look away and just listen if you prefer. So let's have a listen to Nathalie Desai singing Lucia's Mad Scene from Lucia di Lammermoor, and there she is in her fine blood-stained gown. And of course, the audience couldn't resist to start their applause even before the orchestra stopped playing. And for any musicians amongst you, that high note at the end was a top E flat, which is extraordinarily high. Well, from mad scenes to, well, me being madly in love, here we're going to be talking about an opera written by Verdi. That's a painting of him on the right there by Giovanni Boldini. Very fine painting too, I think. And he was inspired by Alexandre Dumas, French writer, his play La Dame aux Camélias, the lady with the camellias. And what is quite extraordinary about this lady, this character, which the opera was originally called Violetta and then was changed to La Traviata, is that this character, when she's available to men, she will wear white camellias. And when she's not available, she will wear red ones. And you can see here Sarah Bernhardt made this one of her signature roles on the stage. That's the play, not, of course, the opera. And what would I say about that? The poster here is by Alphonse Mucha. I think that's the right pronunciation. He was of Czech origin and very, very poignant in the Art Nouveau era. You will see that his designs are instantly recognizable, and he was a huge fan of Sarah Bernhardt and would always promote her where possible. So this is La Traviata, fabulous work, quite an early work of Verdi's. Let's consider her to be the character, the heroine, a fallen woman. Talking of which, another fallen woman in opera is Manon Lescaut, and that is an opera by Puccini based on Abbé Prévost, his book Manon Lescaut. In fact, I read that. Somebody gave me a copy, and I took it on holiday and really loved it. And it's set in the 17th century, but it's really seemed so real. It was really, really beautiful. Interestingly, the opera, the story of Manon Lescaut is, I mean, it's really, really sad. I mean, it's a love story, but it's also very tragic. They both die in the end. And what was I going to say about the French version, Massenet's version, simply called Manon, is much more lyrical, sweeter to hear on the ear than Puccini's opera, which is much more. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's very, very, very passionate and dramatic. So. Talking of French writers, we have, this is the man himself, this is Massenet on the right, a photograph. He wrote the opera Werther, which you can see, that's the poster for the first performance. And it's based on the stories of Goethe, interestingly. And his real life. So it's quite tragic. In fact, his book is called The Sorrows of Young Werther. And in it, typically in a nutshell, if we're going to, I'll tell you what Werther is all about in one sentence. Boy meets girl, boy can't have girl, boy kills himself. But Werther didn't kill himself. In fact, a friend of his did at the time, and that sort of inspired him to put it into his story. I mean, it's a very, very beautiful opera. Now, the unusual aspect of this opera is that the main protagonist is a man, and a tenor at that. And here we've got a tenor. This is Edgardo Montevardes, who's a Mexican tenor, who was singing the title role. And this was at a production at the Théâtre National de Lorraine in Nancy in France. And I know the designer for this opera, and Leslie Travers said to me that his inspiration for this stage set, which kind of looks quite empty, I hope you would agree, the paintings and the wall panels were inspired by a classical artist. Now, I wonder if any of you might wonder or think, does anyone spring to mind when you look at this sort of Roman campagna? Well, I'll tell you, it is actually Nicolas Poussin. And Leslie said he looked at a lot of his artwork to create the set for that, but it's very beautiful. And I think what we're trying to get here is that there's some form of like decadence, and that things are beginning to rot and fade away as they do in his life. And it's very tragic. He can't have the girl who he loves, Charlotte, who interestingly is a mezzo-soprano, not a soprano. Her sister in the opera, Sophie, is a soprano, but it's not a very big role. So it's quite an unusual setup for opera. Normally you have a heroine, a soprano, and you have a tenor who is also one of the main characters. But here we are. This is he is the central figure here, and he's very, very what should we say, bombastic and very arrogant as a character. So less than 10 years earlier, Tchaikovsky wrote a fabulous piece which basically set the mark for romantic opera coming from Russia. And that was none other than Eugene Onegin. And the painting on the left is by somebody called Orest Kipresky, and he did this in 1827. And that is Pushkin, Alexander Pushkin. I do love the painting. However, I do find the hand of Pushkin looks really quite unmanly and almost like an animal's claw. I find it quite bizarre. But Tchaikovsky took the poem. Now, interestingly, that Pushkin's work, he's been called the almost like the Shakespeare from Russia. I don't know if you might have read it. I mean, I did when I was a student at the Royal Academy and absolutely loved it. I couldn't put it down. It's so beautifully written. And he has been, his work has been called, these are Pushkin's sonnets. And he writes in iambic tetrameter, whereas Shakespeare writes in iambic pentameter. Anyhow, I will tell you something that when I was at school, there was a particular year when our school allowed girls to wear trousers to school. And so my mum gave me £13 to go out and buy a pair of black trousers for school because it was very cold in the winter. And I went shopping and I came back and she said, "Where are your trousers?" And I said, I didn't get any. She said, "Well, what did you do with the money?" And I said, "Well, I bought Eugene Onegin." And I came back with a large box set of Eugene Onegin from the Bolshoi Opera. And I got so told off. But I have to say, it transformed my life because I love Russian opera, and this one is my favourite. And I did actually sing Tatiana, who is the heroine. She has a very famous letter scene, which is no less than 13 minutes long. So let me just tell you the story in brief. Onegin is quite an arrogant character, and he always as you can see, as you can see from the quote at the bottom, always trying to find a way to manipulate and to use women to his advantage. He turns up in this village, meets Tatiana, a young girl. She falls in love with him. He's totally indifferent about it. and then he disappears, and he comes back years later, and it's all too late. She's married somebody else, and they have this very, very impassioned love scene which lasts about 20 minutes, but it's really, really fine, beautiful writing. So again, it's neither of them die, although there is a famous duel scene where he kills Lenski in the snow. We think by accident. We're not quite sure whether it's deliberate or whether it is an accident, but that's the only person that dies in this opera. So before we go on to the third section, there's one other opera I would like to mention. Well, two actually. One is a famous Russian author, Tolstoy. Yes, believe it or not, his War and Peace has been set as an opera by Prokofiev, but it's not as long. It's not 46 hours long, which is how long it would take you to read read the book. I think it took me about 6 months because I couldn't do it all in one go. And the equivalent of, it's 4.5 hours, the opera is 4.5 hours long. I guess the equivalent to sitting down to read War and Peace would be like seeing Wagner's Ring Cycle 3 times. You don't want to do that on a wooden seat, which is what the seats are in Bayreuth Opera House. I'm afraid they're wooden, so you have to take your own cushion with you. The other opera I just want to mention is Carmen by Bizet, and it was inspired by the book by Prosper Mérimée. Very, very fine work. Unfortunately, I mean, Bizet was 36 when he wrote it. He thought it was going to be a dismal failure, and he was very depressed about it. At that performance, at the premiere, was Shostakovich, and he said, this work is going to be a huge success, and he was right. Because Carmen, I would say Carmen, possibly La Traviata as a very close second, are performed more than any other operas around the world. So let us now go on to my second subject, which is looking at tragedy and revenge and power. And we've got Mozart here. And yes, this is Mozart's full name, Johannes Christostobus Wolfgangus Theophilus. And Theophilus, which is Greek, in Latin is Amadeus and means lover of God. And sometimes for fun, Mozart would sign his letters with his full name, just for fun. So we're going to be looking at 2 works. One is by Beaumarchais, French writer, who wrote La Folle Journée, which is The Marriage of Figaro, or Le Nozze di Figaro. And excuse me. And the other is Spanish writer Tirso de Molina, who wrote The Trickster of Seville and the Stone Guest, and that is Don Giovanni. And it's a very true story. Mozart really did like living it up and having a good time, and wrote the overture to Don Giovanni in a very, very quick fashion. You might have seen the film Amadeus, which sort of sums up his character. So we're going to hear a clip from Don Giovanni, and this is from the Royal Opera House. And this is the scene where the Don is trying to seduce Zerlina, who's actually just married somebody else. And he's saying, oh, come to my castle and I'll entertain you. But really, he's got other ideas. So this is Erwin Schrott singing the role of Don Giovanni, and Louise Older singing Zerlina. Yes, Don Giovanni then from the Royal Opera House. And of course, he gets his own way and she falls for him, as all the women do in that opera. Well, we are going to look at another Italian opera by Verdi, and this is Rigoletto. And the story of revenge. Oh my goodness, this is a perfect example. In fact, it was Verdi's favourite opera. The production 2023 at the Royal Opera House, now called the Royal Ballet and Opera, I should say, had on the right there the opening tableau, which was a tableau mort, was supposed to represent the martyrdom of St. Caravaggio's martyrdom of St. Matthew, which you see on the left. And the martyr in the case of Rigoletto is the daughter. And I don't know if you know the story, but in a nutshell, Rigoletto works for the Duke of Mantua, who is really quite a salacious character. And the Duke wants to have Rigoletto's daughter, Gilda. She does fall for him. And the awful thing about this is it's actually based on a true story. And Victor Hugo wrote a book called Le Roi s'amuse, the king amuses himself. The Italian authorities didn't like it when it came out because of the references to the king being, not seeing him in a good light. And they were trying to get it banned, but of course it didn't succeed, and it is a fantastic opera and one of Verdi's finest. And in fact, Verdi was going to write an opera based on King Lear, didn't get to it, but this is the closest we get to that sort of story where there's a very, very strong relationship between father and daughter. By accident, Rigoletto has his daughter is killed and he doesn't realize it, and it's just, I mean, that is, it's real tragedy. But he thought he was getting revenge on the Duke, but it failed miserably. So it's great content. You can see, I mean, what I think is great is that the colours are not dissimilar to that of Caravaggio, of course, who was a great exponent of chiaroscuro, I'm sure you know. I'm going to be talking a little bit about this word verismo, which refers to opera mostly, but it did initiate in literature, and that the meaning behind it is that which is true, vero, è vero, and that means we're talking about real situations. Whether that's people working, praying, drinking, having fun, a chorus, lots of people on stage. The main characters are low income. We're not talking about dukes or kings and queens here. We're talking about real people, people on the street. And of course, there's some kind of forbidden love, and of course, somebody ends up dying. And a composer who was a fantastic exponent of this was Puccini. And this brings me to Tosca, La Tosca. Beautiful, beautiful opera. And again, we've got, in fact, that's a photograph of Sarah Bernhardt on the right. Although she doesn't look quite like a Tosca like we might have in productions today, where she's normally wearing a lovely red velvet dress and jewels. However, it's quite similar to another Alphonse Mucha. There he is again with his poster for Tosca. And it was sort of set in the French around the French Revolution, when France had to pull out of Rome. I should just tell you that Puccini was very specific with this opera, in so much as he wanted, there are church bells which ring and chime, and he wanted them to have the exact same sonority as those of St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. So we're going to hear a clip of this, and this is the final scene where Scarpia, the evil one, the evil chief of police, thinks he has reached his conquest and got Tosca exactly where he wants her. So everybody is on stage, and it's this sort of mixture of the sacred and the profane together, which it makes a fantastic combination for opera. So let's have a listen. This is Bryn Terfel singing the role of Scarpia. Just before we do that, there is Puccini. That's the man himself. He lived to 66 years old, and he's at his Steinway there. So now we have the clip for the Te Deum.
Respiri una carrozza, presto, seguila dovunque vada, non visto, vedi, palazzo farnese. Nel tuo cuore s'annida Scarpia. Tosca. E Scarpia tanto della tua gelosia. Nel tuo pronto sospetto, nel tuo cuore s'annida Scarpia. nel capo e la più preziosa piccoli occhi vittoriosi vede la fiamma con spasimo
And of course, Tosca was a huge success when it came out in 1900. Little does he know, little does Scarpia know of his fate in Act 2. And that, of course, was the close of Act 1 that you've just heard. What a spectacular opera that is. Well, my third section, as I said, only has 2 examples, and this is where things really began to change. With the avant-garde, music changed. It wasn't so tuneful anymore. It was becoming radicalized. It was not what we were used to. Berg's Wozzeck, it came out in 1925. It was considered to be the first atonal, which means, I suppose, what my dad would have called plinkety-plonk music. My dad always liked to have a tune, so Verdi was his favourite composer, or Puccini, but I happen to like plinkety-plonk music. We have also Kurt Weill's Threepenny Opera, which is set to a text by Bertolt Brecht. It's got jazzy elements combined with more musical theatre and also opera. But it's a very important style because things changed, and we think it could even go back as far as 1868, which was when Wagner wrote Die Meistersinger. I mean, that was supposed to be completely revolutionary, and it takes guts to change the norm in terms of the writing. Berg's Wozzeck, set to based on Georg Buchner's book. Wozzeck. I mean, it's quite harrowing. I mean, it's about a soldier who comes back from the First World War and has PTSD. But it's just 90 minutes of music by Berg, and what he used, what we call leitmotifs, which of course was very, very important in Wagner's music. And a leitmotif, what that is like a little theme, a little short theme. And we've got an example here. Wir arme Leut. we poor people. And that sort of is a recurring little, it's like an earworm. It keeps appearing and represents despair, I suppose. And the heroine, Marie, in this instance, has her own motifs, and so does the major domo. So that was a sort of a stylistic idea, which was really quite exploratory. And I did have to, I'm going to tell you that, well, I went to go and see this at the Paris Opera, and I went with my husband, and he got very expensive seats, and we sat down, and within 2 minutes he was fast asleep and snoring, and it was just so embarrassing. So obviously it wasn't his cup of tea, and I remember just spending most of the 90 minutes just nudging him to keep awake. An opera, again, with this sort of idea of having a centralized character that goes through a transformation. I think that's what I said at the very beginning. Here, in this case, that's actually two images put together. This is Albert Herring by Benjamin Britten. And it's a wonderful story, which this is from the production at English National Opera recently, just a few weeks ago. I went to see it, and in fact I reviewed it. And it's based on the French writer Guy de Maupassant's book, Le Rosier de Madame Husson. And in a nutshell, this small town village in Suffolk, they elect a May Queen every year. And they have to choose somebody who's completely virtuous, but this particular year they can't find anyone, so they have a May King instead, and that May King is Albert Herring, and there he is on the right, and you can see that he is being poured some lemonade, and what he doesn't know is in that lemonade they have put some rum, and he's never had rum before, so he gets tipsy, of course, and he's crowned the May King. And part of his gift is he's given £25, which he goes out and spends a night on the town, and of course comes back as a transformed person the very next day, to everyone's shock and horror, because the character on the left holding that sword is Lady Billows, who is a real sort of matriarch, sort of a mixture between a sergeant major from Dad's army and also a Trunchbull from the Roald Dahl stories. So it's quite humorous. I mean, a fabulous opera, and it's a comedy, and also it's a chamber opera, and chamber means smaller scale, so it doesn't use a full blast orchestra. I think there's 27 players on in the pit. So anyway, that's Albert Herring. My fourth and final reference is going to be fantasy and magic. And here we've got a wonderful, I absolutely love it, this stage design for Die Zauberflöte, the magic flute. Now, I wonder if you can guess when this was actually created. I'm talking about the stage design, not the opera, because it was Mozart's last opera. He died in 1791. So this was created in 1815 for a production in Vienna, and it's so beautiful. And it's sort of representative of the Queen of the Night, der Königin der Nacht, who, there she is, you can see that tiny little figure in the middle. And this is by Schinkel, somebody called Schinkel, who was Prussian. He was also an architect. He designed stage sets, he designed stage furniture, really quite a man of many, many talents. And the entire opera is based on German writer Christoph Wieland's Tales from the East. Tales from the East. And that is the source of the magic flute. And of course, it's very charming, enchanting as well. And here we've got, actually on the left, the chap in the white coat is Chagall. And he designed the sets for a 1967 production in New York, Glorious, glorious colours, fantastical, isn't it? You can see lots of flying figures, sort of half animal, half human. He was absolutely wonderful, wonderful. The work he put into this. I mean, he designed all 221 costumes, and I think there were 16 different stage designs for this. And he did it all. It took him a couple of years, but he did it all himself. So it's very, I am a huge fan. So we're going on now to final composer, which is Rossini. And Rossini, Italian again, he was one of the bel canto composers, the third one. Yeah, I mean, he used a lot of writers, as you can see. He set Otello even, which is not very often done, but again, it's Shakespeare. And incidentally, I don't know if I mentioned earlier that Shakespeare's plays have been set to no less than over 200 operas. That's astonishing. La Donna del Lago, I mentioned that earlier. Sir Walter Scott and Voltaire, he wrote Semiramide and Tancredi. And of course, there's Bernstein's Candide, which is a very modern interpretation of Voltaire. But what I'm looking at is Charles Perrault, who wrote La Cenerentola. He also wrote Puss in Boots, Little Red Riding Hood as well, and this one, Cinderella. We're about to hear a clip of the wonderful Cinderella, and this is Cecilia Bartoli singing. This is the final, as I say, final video clip. It's fabulous, and she's going to sing Non più mesta, which means I am no longer sad anymore. Well, she's got her prince. And the unfortunate thing about this, if I was a mezzo-soprano and I had to sing it, I think, oh my goodness, I've got to wait until the very end of the opera to sing my showcase piece, which normally you get to sing your showcase piece in Act 1 or the beginning of Act 2, but she has to wait till the very end. I'm going to tell you something about Rossini, which I know is a little bit naughty. You know what? He used to plagiarize from other works that he'd written, and the overture to the Cenerentola was stolen from something he wrote earlier called La Gazzetta, the newspaper. So he was really into recycling, as was George Frederick Handel. I should tell you, he also recycled a lot of pieces, and also an aria from Cenerentola is used in The Barber of Seville, Il Barbiere di Sevilla. So I guess, I mean, he wrote the whole thing in 3 weeks, and maybe he was under pressure to do so. I should also let you know that he churned out works at a phenomenal rate. Unlike Donizetti, wrote 70 operas and really struggled to write. Rossini romped through them, but he only wrote 39. And after his 39th opera, he said, I don't want to write opera anymore. And we don't know why, but he lived for another 40 years afterwards. I mean, I find that just utterly fascinating. I've read a lot around this, and the summary that I'm coming to the conclusion is that he didn't like the competition he was getting from France, particularly Meyerbeer. Anyhow, let's listen now to my final clip, which is La Cenerentola, sung by Cecilia Bartoli. Oops, daisy. I'll just click. Here we go. Non più mai staccato il fuoco, stavo sollaro e giornata, affollato di sogni un giorno, il mio cuore vita. Non più mai staccato non più me staccando al fuoco starò solo perché
Non più me
And fabulous singing there from Cecilia Bartoli. Doesn't she have a large mouth? Wow, beautiful, beautiful singing there. I just before I close my presentation, I just want to mention one writer here, and that is based on the Brothers Grimm story. They were, of course, are most famous for Hansel and Gretel. They also wrote a piece called The Juniper Tree, which I produced, and we did that in the UK, and we got great international reviews for it. And of course, they're not called the Brothers Grimm for nothing, because their stories are pretty grim and gory, but they're fairy tale and fantasy, and they all have a great allegorical reference and something to learn from. So again, great for children to enjoy. And my final slide, my penultimate final slide, is this was the cover for the Glyndebourne Festival programme, and I don't know if you may have seen it before, but there are some references to the operas which I have mentioned already this afternoon. And it's very clever how they've done this. But you've got the stone guest on the far left-hand corner there pointing. That's from Don Giovanni. You've got the duel scene from Eugene Onegin. Yeah, you've got well, Madame Butterfly we didn't talk about. There's also a scene from A Midsummer Night's Dream. Again, that's Shakespeare play and written by Benjamin Britten as an opera. So there are lots on there, and I just find it really rather amusing. The fox, incidentally, who looks like he's stolen someone's picnic, is The Cunning Little Vixen, and that's by Janacek. So we started with Shakespeare, and I will end with Shakespeare, because this comment by Duke Orsino: if music be the food of love, play on, give me excess of it, that surfeiting the appetite may sicken and so die. Little does he know that the woman he thinks he's going to learn all his love lessons from is not the case. It's going to be actually from Viola. So that's Twelfth Night, which has been set to a crazy opera by Darius Milhaud, but I haven't seen it. That ends my presentation. So I